Tonight on the Kelly File, new developments with this massive snowstorm, and we have a Kelly File exclusive with Senator Tim Scott after he is attacked by the NAACP. Plus,
breaking tonight, claims the Obama administration has filed a multi-billion-dollar lawsuit as political retaliation against a company that didn't do what the president wanted. Plus, a bombshell in the massive credit card ripoff at Target. Some of the stolen data has just turned up, and the news is not good. And Glenn Beck, on this show tonight, issues a challenge to the New York governor after he said conservatives are not welcome in the state. And wait until you see how Beck answered this question.
When you think back on your time here, how will you remember it? How do you remember it now?
A big night on the Kelly File starts now.
And breaking tonight, a major U.S. company now accusing the Obama administration of using a multi-billion-dollar lawsuit as political retaliation. Welcome to the Kelly File, everyone. I'm Megyn Kelly. The giant financial services firm Standard & Poor's yesterday threw down a stunning challenge in court, claiming in a sworn declaration, and we have a copy of it, that President Obama's former U.S. Treasury Secretary Timothy Geithner threatened the chairman of S&P's parent company in a phone call that warned of consequences after the downgrade came. Now, it came allegedly just days after S&P, quote, angered the White House by downgrading the U.S. credit rating in the middle of the 2011 debt ceiling debate. According to the declaration, the sworn legal declaration, Harold McGraw III says, quote, Geithner said, "You have done an enormous disservice to yourselves and to your country," and then added, quote, "S&P's conduct would be looked at very carefully," he said. "Such behavior could not occur," he said, attributing this to Geithner, "without a response from the government." Now, the Justice Department has filed a $5 billion fraud lawsuit. It was filed about a year ago, accusing S&P of lying about the creditworthiness of complicated financial instruments in the run-out to the 2008 financial crisis. Well, Standard & Poor's is calling the lawsuit meritless, and now we learn that they believe this is all political retaliation by the president and his DOJ for that downgrade that we saw prior. Chris Stirewalt is our Fox News digital politics editor. He did extensive reporting on the debt ceiling debate, and Jay Sekulow is the chief legal counsel at the American Center for Law and Justice. Let me start with you on this, Jay. This is a sworn declaration. This is basically the equivalent of in-court testimony, although he hasn't been cross-examined yet, by the chief of this company who says, Standard & Poor's, who says, what? I mean, take us through exactly what he's alleging happened.
So here's what they're saying happened, that the lawsuit was filed as they've alleged, a retaliation for S&P's downgrading of the U.S. creditworthiness. And the statements that the secretary has made, at least according to the affidavits that have been filed in court, and as you said, Megyn, this is basically sworn testimony, that Timothy Geithner said basically the Department of Justice is not going to let this go unnoticed. The United States is going to not let this go without notice, and there's going to be action and consequences.
And so the thought is,
so
the allegation is
that
the Department of Justice has filed a multi-billion-dollar fraud case against this company
$5 billion.
because they're ticked off that Standard & Poor's downgraded the U.S. credit rating, a thing that was not politically well received by the Obama administration.
Correct. But it's an affirmative defense to the lawsuit, and they can do that.
All right, Chris.
They have the right to do it.
Take us through the person who has filed this declaration, this sworn testimony. Who is this guy?
Well, he ain't Glenn Beck. He is Mr. McGraw. He is a serious individual. He is not a conservative activist. He is not somebody who is known for his criticism of any political figures or anybody at all. What he's known for is being a white shoe, elite, New York, big business, Chamber of Commerce, gives money to Democrats and Republicans kind of guy, not someone who you would expect to ever hear criticize anybody in power of either party.
So he comes out, and I've looked at the declaration myself, and we put the quote on the board, showing the audience exactly what he is now alleging was the threat and what happened. And because he claims, Jay, that they threatened him specifically, but the DOJ comes out and says, well, we were investigating your company long before you had this conversation with Mr. Geithner. So how could the lawsuit be in retaliation for your downgrade? Because we started our investigation of you prior to the alleged threat we made to you.
Yeah, and the answer and exactly what the request is from Standard & Poor's. We want the evidence. We want the information. We want discovery on this very point, because there was an investigation by DOJ to some of these the three major credit bureaus, but the only one that gets prosecuted happens to be the one that goes ahead and downgrades the security rating of the United States. And the affirmative defense here, the retaliation defense, which has been, look, if you look at just the trajectory of how these cases have gone with DOJ, we shouldn't be surprised that there's retaliation for this. But they have the right, in my view, S&P has the right to get those documents to prove its defense that this lawsuit is nothing but politics and was a retaliation move for what S&P determined to be the creditworthiness of the United States.
Chris,
that's simple.
Is it plausible that the Department of Justice would file this size of a lawsuit against one of the major three credit reporting, rating agencies in retaliation for that downgrade? I mean, how bad was that downgrade to the White House, to the president's political fortunes? Why would they think it was that big a deal?
Well, they thought it was a big deal because they had not yet come up with a way that they could fully blame Republicans for it. At the moment, there was a tipping point in the narrative, if you recall, that was going on as we were talking about this, and people were saying, we're spending and borrowing so much money, and we're in a hole, and this is terrible. And then the default word. They struck on the D word, which was default. Republicans want a default, want a default, want a default, want a default. You couldn't go anywhere without hearing default, default, default. And they changed the narrative, and then it was a Republican problem, they said, that it was the downgrade. But there was a moment, and I'm sure during this sort of dashboard gripping panic, that the administration was going to be the one that presided over the first U.S. credit downgrade, that they were going to do anything they could to let McGraw-Hill know, don't go there.
Well, it's an interesting case. The Department of Justice has denied in the past that these two things are connected in any way. They do point out, as I mentioned, that they started investigating S&P prior to that conversation between Mr. Geithner and this McGraw-Hill, this S&P executive. And S&P is now trying to dismiss similar lawsuits by 15 U.S. states that have been brought against it as well, all related to the financial meltdown. So we will see whether, they can't necessarily allege retaliation in each one of these. Geithner wasn't necessarily calling on behalf of all these states, so we'll see how his defense holds up in court. Gentlemen, thank you.
You bet.
Well, today also marks 1 year to the day since President Obama was sworn in for his second term. And in that time, the latest numbers from the Real Clear Politics average of polls show his approval ratings have been on a steady downward slide. His disapproval on a steady climb for a total swing of 20 points in the last 12 months. Look at that. The red is the disapproval, and the white is the approval. And you can see they're going in the wrong direction for the president currently. Our chief White House correspondent, Ed Henry, is live in the snow at the White House. Ed?
Megan, dedicated to you and your viewers. The bottom line is